article on the website, and I just want to give you an idea about this new article, which I am again and again referring to. If you go to the AAA technical articles and you just type the AAA technical articles on Google, you will come to the first hyperlink. You click on the first hyperlink and you come to the AAA technical articles, right? So on the Google, write AAA technical articles, click on the first hyperlink, and you come to the technical articles of AAA. Now over here, if you just scroll down the technical articles, I've been guiding you about the articles which are in front of your screen every time in my webinar. But over here in these articles, there is a new article added up. You go down, leave the first article, leave the second, leave the third, leave the fourth, leave the fifth. Look at this sixth article right over here. If I can just make a bracket here, look at this article. This is the article which is published in April 2021, and this is a new article. Can it be examined in the June 21 exams? It can be, it cannot be. But should you read it? Definitely, because you cannot just leave this article and enter the June 21 exams. So let's explore this article to an extent we can by the end of the time today at 11:30. And if something is left, we'll explore that at the start of the day 2 tomorrow. Right. So let's start the journey on the exposure draft and looking at the proposed revision to the code to promote the role and mindset of the professional accountant. So please download this article. This has already been provided to you in the handout section of the webinar. You can download it from the handout section, right? So that is already with you. Now, just moving back and exploring this article. And taking on this article here. See, this is the article right in front of your screen. Exposure draft. Exposure draft means it's just a current issue. Exposure draft means this is not an affirmative thing, but this is in a phase of development. Proposed revisions to the code to promote the role and mindset expected of a professional accountant. Now, you all know professional accountant is a big term, right? Professional accountant even includes the auditors, and even includes all the accountancy professions, So this is a wide proposals promoting the role and promoting the mindset expected of a professional accountant. Now, what is in this proposals for a AAA student, and how a AAA student should look at this proposals for your exam perspective, and where you should be focusing on in this exposure draft? Obviously, you will be reading across the 7 pages over the next 2 days, 3 days. So you just download this exposure draft and you start to read it. You might understand something, you might not understand something, but the very first thing you have to do is that you scroll over the exposure draft and read every line and every paragraph of the exposure draft in like 3 to 4 hours and see how much you understand. Now, my purpose is to make you understand this exposure draft and to give you the right guidance where you should be focusing on in this exposure draft and what benefit will you get out of this exposure draft for your June 2021 exams, right? So what I have done is that instead of reading the article with you and just wasting time in this webinar, I have developed my own summary, and I think the summary has already been shared with you in the handout section. This is the summary which I have developed for my students. I hope you can see this in the handout section. The new AAA examining team article published in April 2020. Can you all confirm this is available in the handout section? Exposure draft, proposed revision to the code to promote the role and mindset expected of a professional accountant. This is a summary and an exam guidance by Kashif Kamran. So let's start the journey. Let's see what is the proposed revision to the code and what the proposed revision should mean to our AAA student. Okay, let's start on with the journey. Now, I try to make a summary over here, and I just want to read that with you. I believe this revision has come to the code, and code is the syllabus area B of your paper, and the syllabus area B of your paper is ethical and professional issues. Now, as part of your syllabus, as a AAA student, you should have an idea about the code of conduct. And the code of conduct is a syllabus area B. So I think this exposure draft is hitting the syllabus area B. And if it is examined, it will be examined in the context of the syllabus area B. So that's the very first sentence I have marked over here in my summary, that this exposure draft covers the numerous aspects which are examinable part of the syllabus area B of the AAA paper. And the AAA syllabus already includes ethical and professional issues. So the student should be well equipped with this exposure draft, and they should have an idea about the proposed changes which have come to the code of conduct. Right? So in terms of the placement of the question, Bahaval, it's too early. Examiner can put a question on this exposure draft anywhere in the section A or section B. We know syllabus area B is a flexible syllabus area, and being a flexible syllabus area, it can come in the question number 1, 2, or 3, anywhere. The bottom line is we should be prepared about the summary of this exposure draft, right? Wherever it gets tested in the exam paper. But in terms of the syllabus area, this is the syllabus area B. The next bullet, I just try to summarize what is the key message of the exposure draft. This exposure draft is covering numerous aspects relating to the professional accountant role. So that's one thing covered in this article, the role of the professional accountant. Public interest is another area covered in this exposure draft. Concept of integrity has also been covered in this exposure draft. Objectivity has also been covered in this exposure draft. Professional behavior has been covered in the exposure draft, and inquiring mind has been covered in the exposure draft. Now, these are the terms which you are not listening for the first time: inquiring mind, professional behavior, objectivity, concept of integrity, public interest, professional accountant. These are not jargons which you are all listening for the first time. Am I right? But these are areas where changes have been brought in. These are areas where something has changed, and you should know that because it's an exposure draft. So professional accountant role, public interest, concept of integrity, objectivity, professional behavior, and even inquiring mind. And not just that, the dangers of being biased and the internal culture of the firm. What is a danger that the accountant is biased? What sort of biasness is the article talking about? And you are all familiar with the word bias. And you know that whenever the auditor is biased, it is a threat to objectivity, right? And how can a culture of the firm contribute towards overcoming the danger of bias? And how can the culture of the firm overcomes the concept of integrity? So how many things have been gone into this article? Just recap. Number 1, the professional accountant role. Number 2, the public interest. Number 3, the concept of integrity. Number 4, the objectivity. Number 5, the professional behavior. Number 6, the inquiring mind. Number 7, the danger of being biased. And number 8, internal culture of the firm. So these are the key learnings when you are reading across the 7-page article. Is that bullet number 2 clear to all of you? So I just tried highlighting the areas which you need to touch upon and make a summary of when you're reading the actual article from the ACC website. Is that clear? Can you respond to my question, everyone? Okay, that's great for understanding. Okay, now moving on, next bullet. In the next bullet, I have made it clear several times that every time there is an exposure draft, will it be examined in the next exam setting? The answer is yes and no, both. We have seen in the past practices of the examiner that every time a new article is published, it has been examined in the immediate next exam setting. That is the practice of the examiner. But we have also seen that sometimes examiners skip the next exam sitting. Might be that he don't give you this exposure draft in the June exams and give you it in the September exams. But you cannot just go unprepared about this article in the June exams. You still need to prepare it in an effective manner because it might come in June or it might come in September or might even come in December. Irrespective of that, this is the new article which you should have on your fingertips. Okay, now the key 5 changes. and the definition used and the terminologies introduced by the exposure drafts are potential to the AAA paper in the coming exam sittings in 2021, right? So when I read this article, so I try to summarize the changes into five changes. There are lots of definitions used, lots of terminologies used in this exposure draft, which I believe is a potential to a AAA student. Now, I tried making a summary of that in my document, and I will be reading through that summary and guiding you about the potential changes which have come in the exposure draft and why. Okay, let's get down to the background of this exposure draft. What is the reason of the background? What was the reason of the change? The background. There has been a growing demand on IESBA to strengthen the concept of professional skepticism. So there was a growing demand on IESBA to strengthen the concept of professional skepticism. Look at this word strengthen, because professional skepticism is not a new terminology, right? So it is nothing introduced. It's just to strengthen. It's just to strengthen the concept of professional skepticism. Number one. Number two, requiring all professional accountants to exercise it rather than solely the audit practitioner. I hope you will agree with me that whenever we use the professional skepticism, one thing which strikes our mind is the auditor. Am I right? But now what IESBA is doing, they want to broaden the concept of professional skepticism, not just to the auditor, but to every professional accountant. So do you understand the bullet number two, requiring all professional accountants to exercise professional skepticism, not just the audit practitioner? Because before this, professional skepticism was a jargon confined to the audit practices. And you have a topic of professional skepticism, right, in the AAA paper. So is everyone clear with the background that what was the reason of introducing the changes in the code? Because there was a growing demand on IESBA to strengthen the concept of professional skepticism and to require all professional accountants to exercise it, not just the audit practitioner. If you're clear, let's move further. The proposed changes. Now, the proposed changes to the code of conduct have been given in a table below. So let's understand the proposed changes and let's understand one by one what a proposed change means to you as a AAA student, right? Now, you can see the table over here. And in this table, the column number 2 is the proposal areas. These are the proposal areas which IESBA has introduced, proposal areas. And under every proposal area, what is the proposed change is in the column number 3. Can you see this table clearly in front of your screen, everyone? The column number 2 is the proposal area, which you should know for your exams in June 21. And the column number 3 tells you about the proposed changes. Is that clear? Everyone can see that? So I'll pick every proposal area and I'll discuss with you the proposed changes. And if anything needs an elaboration, I will be giving you the elaboration. Now let's look at the first area of change. The first area of change is role and responsibility of a professional accountant. Role and responsibility of a professional accountant. You all know who is a professional accountant, right? The auditor is a professional accountant. Even any other role adopted by an accountant is a professional accountant, right? The professional accountants can be the management accountants, can be the financial accountants, can be the auditors, can be the internal auditors. So professional accountants can take different roles, right? Now, irrespective whatever role you are taking as a professional accountant, the code of conduct is highlighting your role and responsibilities as a professional accountant. Let's see what is the role and responsibility of a professional accountant. I'm using the short form here, PA. PA means the professional accountant. The professional accountants are involved in a wide range of roles and acknowledge that organization involves the professional accountant in these activities because they recognize the skill and value they bring to the activities they undertake. Do you believe professional accountants are involved in a wide ranges of role in an organization? Like internal auditors, like external auditors, like financial accountants, like financial consultants, like advisors, like management accountants? Are they involved in wide-ranging roles, professional accountants? And do they bring the right set of skills to the organization? Do they bring the right set of values to the organization where they work in? So do they make a contribution to the organization because of their skills and roles? Whether they're working as a management accountant or they're working as a financial accountant or they're working as an auditor, or they're working as a tax consultant, or they're working as a tax advisor, whatever. So they have a role, right? And they bring the right sets of skills and values to the organization, and that is what the organization really appreciates. In the bullet number 2, it tells us that the professional accountant should work in public interest. That's very important. The public interest. The professional accountant should work in the public interest and adhere to the code and all relevant laws and regulations in the discharge of the responsibility. Now, if you are a professional accountant in Pakistan, for example, you're not just adhering to the codes, the code of conduct, you're also adhering to your national laws and regulations. Now, that is the best discharge of your responsibilities. So as a professional accountant, you should work in the public interest, right? So the change which has been brought by the code is the definition of a professional accountant, is the clarity on the role of professional accountant, and is that the professional accountant should work in the public interest and should adhere to the code, because the code was not using the word professional accountant with clarity, right? Now the code is using the word professional accountant with clarity, and the code is recognizing the wider roles of the professional accountant with clarity, and the code is also recognizing that the professional accountant needs to work in a public interest, which is very important, and they should adhere to code. So there is a reinforcement, right? And there is a clarity on the role of a professional accountant and how they should work in the public interest. So the number 1 bullet, role and responsibility of a professional accountant, number 1, if I can just take it down to my Word file I was using for the webinar today, and I can just construct my new article summary here. Okay, we're just discussing the new article, which is the exposure draft. And in this exposure draft, number 1, something has been newly introduced. In this exposure draft, something has been reinforced. In this exposure draft, something has been clarified. So the purpose of the exposure draft is not just to bring a new thing. It's also to reinforce something. It's also to clarify something for the sake of clarity, right? Now, the first thing we are understanding is the proposal. The first proposal we are understanding currently, number 1, is the proposal which relates with role and responsibility of a professional accountant. Now, you have already seen what has been the highlighting point of the code here, but this proposal basically has been brought to reinforce the role of PA, to bring clarity to the role of PA. So it's not something new. It's just a reinforcement, and it's just a clarity to the role of the PA, and the PA should work in the public interest, and the PA should adhere with relevant laws and regulation. Is number 1 clear to all of you? So this is the first proposal under the exposure draft, role and responsibility of a professional accountant. So this is just a reinforcement, and this is just a clarity on the role and on the public interest of a professional accountant. Is everyone sound and clear on it? Right? So with the growing need of professional accountants, with a growing role of the professional accountant, it was very, very important for IESBA to come with the reinforcement and clarity on the role of the PA, and that the PA should work in the public interest, because there is a growing demand and lots of stakeholders are relying on the work of the PA. So there was a growing pressure on the PA as well, that the PA should work in the public interest and adhere to the laws and regulations. Okay, let's look at the proposal number 2 then. The proposal number 2, which has been brought in, is much more important for a AAA student, because it is about the changes to the definition of objectivity and professional behavior. Now that's important. Changes to the definition of objectivity and professional behavior. Now, you all know the code of conduct, right? You all know the code of conduct, right? And you all know about objectivity, right? And you all know about professional behavior. You must have studied that in your AA paper and your AAA paper, professional behavior and objectivity. Now, what has been important here? Changes. So that's an important word here. Let's see what has been the change in the definition of objectivity, and what has been the change in the definition of professional behavior. Let's find the change. And this is very, very important for a AAA student to know, because objectivity and professional behavior is part and parcel of your syllabus. So let's find the change. What if the examiner asks you, explain the revised definition of objectivity, or define the revised definition of objectivity? Because every time a new article is tested, the new article is tested for knowledge. The new article is tested for knowledge. So you should know the definitions even. So many times in the past attempts, whenever the new article came in, the examiner has even asked for definitions from the new article. So you need to prepare in an excellent manner here, right? Is that clear? So let's find out the changes in the definition of objectivity and professional behavior. I'm taking back my table to explore it. Okay, let's find the changes. Number one, the proposed over here, it's to propose to amend the definition of objectivity in order to present it in a positive manner rather than a negative manner. The previous definition of objectivity was in a negative manner. It was put in a negative manner, and the code of conduct thought it's very important that we put the definition of objectivity in a positive manner rather than in a negative manner. Now, when you look at the previous definition of objectivity, it was put in a way which was in a negative manner. Look at this, the previous definition. The previous definition of objectivity was not compromising professional or business judgment. It used to start with the word not. So if anyone asks you what is objectivity, so you used to tell not compromising the professional or business judgment. The definition was valid, but the definition was put in a negative manner. So the code of conduct decided, rather than putting the definition with the word not, let's put the definition in a more positive manner, and this is the proposed new definition. The new proposed definition is actual exercise of professional or business judgment without these being compromised by factors such as bias, conflict of interest, or any form of undue influence by or an undue reliance on other parties. Now see, this is the new definition: actual exercise of professional or business judgment without these being compromised by factors such as bias, undue influence, conflict of interest, etc. So will you learn this definition? Now, this definition is not saying not compromising professional or business judgments. This definition is saying actual exercise of professional or business judgment without being influenced or without being biased. So is this definition important from an examination point of view? So if the examiner asks you to define objectivity, will you define objectivity this way, which I put in red? Or you will use the not definition? No, you cannot use the not definition. This not definition is to be strike through, not use it. So are you clear with the old and new definition now? Will you learn the new definition, everyone? Right? The red one, right? The red one will go into the exam paper. So the new definition is the actual exercise of professional or business judgment. Not compromising professional or business judgment was an old definition. So what changes have been brought in objectivity? The definition. And they've shifted from a negative definition to a positive definition. Yes, it's still an exposure draft, right? Which will be implemented in the next few months. But this exposure draft is examinable, so you should know the new definition. So if the examiner asks you the new definition of objectivity, you will give this definition to the examiner, right? So the very first change is what? The very first change is that we have moved from the negative definition to a positive definition. So negative to positive definition. Will all of you remember that? Number one. Yes, you should use the new definition, Osama. That's the reason I'm telling you, right? What's the reason of bringing the article? Who brought this article? The AAA examining team brought this article for a student to know the new definition for June 21 exams, right? Exactly. You should now use this new definition because this is an article by the examiner. So negative to a positive definition, right? Move back. Next. The next thing, the IESBA has also proposed to include a technological bias as a result of the technological advancement, particularly the artificial intelligence and data analytics and their impact on professional accountants' objectivity. Technological bias is a new term. Now, as a student, what if the examiner asks you, what is a technological bias? Because auditors should be free from bias, right? In order to be objective. True? But what if the examiner asks you define technological bias? And you might be confused in the exam paper. What is a technological bias? And the technological bias is a new terminology, right, which has been brought in the code of conduct. So if the auditor is biased, will the auditor be objective? If the auditor is biased, will the auditor be objective? Should the auditor be free from bias? Right, whenever Sadia, whenever examiner asks anything on the exposure draft, he will refer the exposure draft in the requirement. He will say, as per the new exposure draft, something like that, and he will ask you something. So if the examiner asks you something about the exposure draft, then you will quote the exposure draft and you will reproduce the knowledge of the exposure draft, right? So auditor should be free from bias in order to be objective. Now there is a new bias coming here, technological bias, because of the advent of the artificial intelligence and because of the advent of the data analytics. What is a technological bias? Now, if you go down and explore what is a technological bias, let me explain you that. Technological bias is very simple. If you just give me 1 minute, if I can put the definition in front of you for a technological bias. Just 1 minute, right? So you can understand it in a more proper manner. Okay, just let me put it with you. Just 1 minute. Okay, I hope you can see the screen back, right? Now, what is a technological bias, right? Now, try to understand. Technological bias is basically that the auditor gets influence with technology and the auditor starts believing that whatever results have been produced by a computer system or whatever results have been put in by a computer program is right, and he starts to trust computer. So if the auditor trusts the computers, or if the auditor trusts the computer systems, or if the auditor starts to trust the results of the computer systems, because more and more computers are being used in organization and most of the results, most of the financial statements and everything is being produced from the computer systems. So if you trust the computer, you trust the computers, you trust the computer, you trust the results generated from the computers, results generated from the computer. That means you are just relying on the computer and you are biased. You are relying on the computer and you're not doing anything which you should have done as an auditor. You trust the computer, you trust the results generated by the computer without doing any testing of the computers or without doing any procedures on the computer or without making your own independent working, and you just rely on the working of the computer, then you will be biased. If you want to avoid the technological bias, the auditor should develop their own workings and compare that with the computer working. And the auditor should also test the controls of the computer. Auditor should test controls around technology before placing reliance on technology. You cannot just have a blind reliance on technology. That is a technological bias, right? So if the auditor goes to an audit of an organization and he have a blind reliance, see, auditor never places a blind reliance on anything. Auditor should test the controls around computers, believe computers are working right. Can computer makes error? Give me an answer. Can there be a malfunctioning in a computer? Can there be an error in a computer? Can the computer make errors while they're doing a calculation? So can we trust on them 100%? Can we trust on them 100%? No. But if the auditor trusts them on a 100% basis, that is known as a technological bias. Is that clear to everyone? So can we have a blind reliance on a computer? Or should we perform test of controls on computers, and should we perform procedures on computer? Should we have our own independent workings and we compare that with computer? Is that better approach to audit, everyone? Or we can just have a blind reliance on computer. Is that right? Is that wrong? Blind reliance on computer, is that right? Is that wrong? That is absolutely wrong. So should the auditor have an independent working? Should the auditor test the controls around computer, the technology, before he places the reliance? So can auditor rely on technology? Yes. But before placing reliance on technology, should he test the systems around technology? Can auditor place a blind reliance even on an expert? Can an auditor place a blind reliance even on the internal auditor? No. So how can the auditor place a blind reliance on technology? So with the advent of technology, with the greater use of technology, the auditor should ensure that whenever the auditor is relying on technology, you should not have a perception that every time technology is right. So this is if you have this perception, this is a very wrong perception as an auditor. Perception that technology is always right. Technology is always right. Is that the right perception? The code of conduct says this is the biasness. This perception is the biasness. I hope you're getting my message here. This perception is the biasness. So should we have this perception? Is that the right perception? If the auditor has this perception, is the auditor entering into a technological bias? Are you clear? So is everyone clear of how to go about defining a technological bias? Even if on Google, you go on Google after my session today, go on Google and write on Google technological bias, and you will get a very good definition of technological bias. You can learn that for exam paper, right? So that's the next change which has been brought in, a definition of a technological bias as part of objectivity. So if the auditor has a technological bias, will he be objective? Answer. If the auditor has a technological bias, is he objective? No. Okay, the last thing from this part of the discussion. The definition, the last thing, the definition of professional behavior has been strengthened. Has it been changed? No. Has the definition of professional behavior changed? No. It says the definition of professional behavior has been strengthened. Has been strengthened to include not just compliance with the code, but also to act in the public interest. So the definition of professional behavior, it has just been strengthened, and it is not just you comply with the code of conduct, it's also that you work in the public interest. So that's the third important thing, right? Which you should know from the proposal, that the definition of professional behavior has been strengthened to include not just compliance with the code of conduct, but also to work in the public interest. So as a professional accountant, your responsibility is not just to comply with the code of conduct, your responsibility also is to work in the public interest, because the public relies on the work of the professional accountant. The public relies on the work of an auditor even. So more and more stakeholders, more and more sections of the public, and more third parties are increasingly relying on the work of auditors. Am I right? So does that put a burden on the accountants to work in public interest? Is more and more people relying on accountants, auditors, and different roles of accountants? So is that increasing the demand that they should also work in the public interest? Right? So number two, changes to objectivity and professional behavior. Is that clear to all of you? Number one thing you should know is the change of the definition from negative to positive in terms of objectivity. introducing the terminology technological bias due to advent of technology, and then strengthening the definition of a professional behavior from not just complying with code, but also to work in the public interest. Right? Is that clear to all of you, the proposals? Okay, one last proposal for the class today, number 3. If you explore the number 3 proposal from the exposure draft, back to the table. The new application material to the principle of integrity. So we have brought some new, the code of conduct has brought some new application material to the principle of integrity. Is principle of integrity a new principle? No. The code of conduct has brought some new application material to the principle of integrity, right? So the number 3rd proposal is the new application material to the concept of integrity. Integrity is not a new concept. Integrity is a concept you must have studied in the AA paper and then again in the AAA paper. But let's see what new concept material has been brought to the principle of integrity and what you should know as a AAA student. Okay, I'm reading the column in front of the new application material which has been brought for integrity. Let me do it larger and let's read what have been some of the new material in integrity. Integrity includes having the determination to act appropriately when confronted with dilemmas or difficult situations. Is that the good definition code of conduct has brought in? Determination to act appropriately. Integrity. When confronted with a dilemma or a difficult situation. Now, someone is bribing you. Is that a difficult situation? And determination to act appropriately. Someone is asking you to cheat. Now that is a dilemma. Determination to act appropriately is integrity. So is that a right definition, everyone? Determination to act appropriately when confronted with the dilemmas or a difficult situation, right? Are you clear with the bullet number 1, everyone? Okay, number 2. When confronted with dilemmas or difficult situations such as. So that means below is the examples. What can be some difficult dilemmas and what can be some difficult situations you might be confronted with where you need to act appropriately? Number 1, standing one's ground when facing pressure to do otherwise. Now, at times when you're working in an office environment or in a workplace environment as an accountant, we do feel pressure from our directors, the directors asking us to window dress the financial statement or the director asking us to manipulate the results. Standing one's ground when facing pressure to do otherwise. That is the determination to act appropriately. Standing one's ground when facing pressure to do otherwise. Is that clear, everyone? So that is your determination to act appropriately as an accountant. Number 2, challenging others when appropriate, even when doing so create potential adverse personal or organizational consequences. Challenging others. If you think you are a manager, you are a finance manager, right? And you believe your finance director is wrong, challenge him. Don't just say, oh, he's my finance director. If I challenge him, I might lose my job. No, that is not the definition of integrity. A lot of time, a professional accountant doesn't challenge because he has a fear of losing job. Am I right? Do you agree? So if you are a manager, you will never challenge your director because you know if I challenge my director will not like it. And my director will say, okay, you are fired from the job. So the second situation is challenging others when appropriate. And number 3 situation is the IESBA dropped the term moral courage from its proposal and instead used to act appropriately as above, believing that the term moral might be misunderstood in different countries. So basically, they are saying moral courage. You should have a moral courage, right, to speak in front of your director. Or you should have a moral courage not to accept a bribe. Or you should have a moral courage to speak the truth. But the code of conduct has dropped the term moral courage for integrity crossed through because they thought that moral courage might be a misunderstood term, and instead they brought a term instead used to act appropriately. Act appropriately. So what is the jargon you will be using in the exam paper? Moral courage or to act appropriately in a given situation. So if someone asks you to define integrity, will you say integrity is a moral courage? Or will you say integrity is to act appropriately? Which term will you use? Act appropriately, right? So please ensure that in an exam paper, when you are defining integrity, so integrity means to act appropriately, determination to act appropriately when confronted with dilemmas or difficult situation. So there has been a reinforcement here, which you should know for exam paper. Number one, determination to act appropriately when confronted with difficult situations, right? And will you remember the examples I've given you? Number one, standing one grounds. Standing one grounds, that's the first example here. Number two, challenging others. You should challenge others. That's very important, right? So these were the two areas where you should act appropriately. And how would you assure you are acting appropriately? When you stand one ground means that you are firm. If someone offers you a bribe, stand one ground. Say, no, I cannot take a bribe, even though you might lose a job. Standing one's ground. Is that clear, Muhammad Arslan? So standing one ground is if someone asks you to manipulate the financial statement, will you? Is that clear? So is everyone clear with the new application material to the principle of integrity? That the code of conduct is defining integrity in a different manner. So does integrity means to be straightforward? No. Will you write the definition that in the exam paper? Integrity doesn't mean to be straightforward anymore. Integrity now means determination to act appropriately. Will you remember that key word for exam paper? So are you clear on number one, number two, number three from the code of conduct provisions? We still have number 4 and number 5, which I will start at the beginning of my day 2 tomorrow. The 4th and the 5th, which I'll do tomorrow, and then we'll wrap up this article. But I hope the encouragement has been given to you to read this article, which is spread on 7 pages. And I hope this summary document will help you. Even if you read this summary document, that's an excellent preparation you can have about this document for your upcoming exams in June. So will you take a printout of this summary document I prepared for you as a tutor? And will you go through this summary document for the day 2 tomorrow? Just to ensure that you know exactly where the changes have come in. So was this document effective? I thought initially you might be struggling with this document, but I hope you start making sense of this document now, right? So please ensure this new article is on your fingertips. I will be spending another 10 to 15 minutes tomorrow on this new article defining how things have changed into the code for a professional accountant. And I hope you will start using the practice platform even. And I hope the encouragement which has been given to you on the use of the practice platform, you will start to follow it. And please ensure that you watch my previous webinars, the March 2021 webinar, the December 20 webinar as a minimum, Now from tomorrow, when I take on my webinar, hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Kashif Kamran and I welcome you all to the day 2 of the Advanced Audit and Assurance Practice to Pass webinar for June 2021 exams being organized by ACCA Pakistan. Now let's see what is the agenda for the day 2 of the webinar. Now on the day 1 yesterday, we were focusing on the computer-based exams and I was guiding you about the use of the practice platform, which I will be guiding you over the next 4 days as well. Alongside that, on the day 1, I was looking at the new article which was recently published by the AAA examining team, and we were left with certain part of the article which I will be doing today at the beginning of the webinar. But the main agenda for the day 2 today is to look at the business risk. So I'll be spending a lot of time today on business risk. The risk of material misstatement, I'll be guiding you about watching my March webinar. my March 21 webinar, which I did for ACCA Pakistan, and the day one of the March 21 webinar, because that was really insightful webinar in terms of understanding the audit risk and risk of material misstatement. So I'll be guiding you about watching the March 21 day one so that you are very good on the risk of material misstatement and audit risk. But I'll be doing a drilling of the analytical procedures using the practice platform. So that would be really, really important for all of you to understand that how would you perform analytical procedures if a question asks for using the spreadsheet available in the computer-based exam and the practice platform. So we have three things on agenda today. First, the article which was left incomplete yesterday. That's number one. And after completing the article today, we'll move on to the business risk. And at the end of the day, I'll be showing you how to use a spreadsheet in a computer-based exam. And just before starting with the proceedings, do confirm me that all of you can hear me. Okay, that's great, right? So you are all familiar with the agenda, right? So on the day one, we were left with a certain part of the article, and I'll start with that article again. And once I complete the article, then I'll shift the focus towards the business risk, right? And then guiding you about the use of the spreadsheet in a computer-based exam so that you are familiar with the practice platform. Let's start on with the proceeding, and let's start on with the agenda. Okay, now yesterday towards the end of my day one, we were discussing an article which is basically an exposure draft, and I hope you remember that. And the exposure draft, which is an updated article on the website by the AAA examining team, there were 5 proposed changes. And out of the 5 proposed changes, we discussed the first 3. The first proposed change, which we discussed yesterday on the day one, was the role of the professional accountant, and the proposed revision to the code of conduct has highlighted and has reinforced the role of the professional accountant and the wide ranging role the professional accountant play in a society and in an organization. And the professional accountant should adhere to the code of conduct, and the professional accountant should adhere to the national laws and regulations. So that was the first thing we discussed yesterday on the day one. The second big change which came into the proposed revision was the change of the definition. The definition for objectivity was changed, and I did highlighted the change in the definition of objectivity from being a negative toned definition to a positive toned definition. If you missed that out, then you have to watch the day one. And we also discussed the changes which has been brought to the professional behavior of the uh, of the professional accountant. We also discussed about the introduction of a new terminology, which is known as the technological bias, and the definition of what basically is a technological bias. So if you missed out certain part of the article, please do watch the day one. But if you have attended the day one, I hope you remember that we discussed the first 3 proposed revisions. Do you agree with me? If you were there in the live session yesterday, have we discussed the first 3? The wide-ranging role of the professional accountant, the changes in objectivity and the professional behavior. I hope you got the terminology technological bias in the session yesterday. And then we discussed about integrity and how important changes have come in the concept of integrity, and so on and so forth. So I am going with the 4th and 5th one now. So to wrap up this proposed revision coming under the code of conduct. Now I'm using the same summarized version which I have developed for student, and I hope you remember this summary I was using yesterday, which I even shared with you yesterday over the WhatsApp group and even on the resources during the live webinar. Now, in terms of this summary, we had discussed the first 3 areas where the changes have come in, right? And we have discussed the proposed area 1, we have discussed the proposed area 2, and we have discussed the proposed area 3. So I'm not taking a recap of that because that will waste the time of the webinar, but you can watch the day 1 of the webinar to understand what was the proposed area 1, 2, 3 if you have missed out the webinar, right? Now, the proposed area 4, where changes have been made to the code of conduct, and you should be aware of that from an examination point of view. Now, on your screen, if you look at the fourth area, which is very, very important, the fourth area looks at strengthening. So the fourth area is looking at strengthening the code through requiring professional accountants to have inquiring minds, requiring professional accountants to have an inquiring mind. And the code of conduct have been changed, and they have changed the code of conduct to require the professional accountants to have an inquiring mind. I hope you all agree with me that in a AAA paper, we do use a terminology which is known as professional skepticism, right? But that terminology of professional skepticism is confined to the auditor. Now, the code of conduct, the revised code of conduct, is using a terminology of an inquiring mind. And this terminology is being used for the professional accountants, not for the auditor, right? So if I just take on my Word file for the day 2 in front of your screen, and we start with the objective of the day 2. What we need to do on day 2, we have to do 3 things on day 2. Number 1, we have to complete the article we were discussing yesterday, complete the article from day 1, which I have just started. The second thing we need to focus on is the business risk plus the practice platform. How would you do the business risk on the practice platform? And then the analytical procedures. How would you do the analytical procedures if asked for in a AAA paper using the spreadsheet, using the spreadsheet. So these are 3 things I would be focusing on today, right? So let's first start on with the agenda 1, which is to look at the article we were discussing yesterday. So we were discussing the article yesterday. I hope you all remember that. That was the exposure draft in terms of the code, which is the new article published by the code of conduct. Sorry, new article published by the AAA examining team. And we discussed 3 areas yesterday. We were left with 2. Now, the first area we are discussing in this article today, the fourth one, is basically this: professional accountants to have inquiring mind. Now, the code of conduct have been changed, and the code of conduct have been changed to require a professional accountant to have an inquiring mind. Now, I hope you all agree with me that previously, we used to use a terminology which is part of your AAA syllabus. I hope you all have heard this terminology, right? Professional skepticism. Is it part of your AAA syllabus? Is it a topic in your AAA paper? Professional skepticism, everyone? Right? So is it a topic? It is, right? But the term professional skepticism is confined to the external auditor. Now, this is a very specific jargon, professional skepticism. The meaning of the word professional skepticism means inquiring mind. But this is a terminology which is confined to the external auditor only. So the code of conduct thought that it is important that they use a different terminology. They use a different terminology for professional accountants. And which terminology have they used for the professional accountants instead of professional skepticism? They use a different terminology for professional accountant, and that is known as inquiring mind. So they introduced a new jargon, inquiring mind, which is the literal meaning of the word professional skepticism, right? Is everyone clear on this? So will you use the word professional skepticism for a professional accountant, or will you use the word inquiring mind for a professional accountant? Inquiring mind. And for the auditor and for the external auditor, which jargon will you use in the exam paper? Professional skepticism, right? Now let's understand what is the definition of inquiring mind, which has been used in the revised code for a professional accountant. And I hope you understand the difference between a professional accountant and an auditor. Professional accountant is a wide terminology, right? Which includes the different roles the accountant can adopt in a given organization, right? So I hope you all understand the difference between a professional accountant, versus an auditor, right? Are you all clear on this? The difference between a professional accountant and an auditor? Should I write it down? Right? The professional accountant versus the auditor, what's the difference? The professional accountant is a wider terminology, is a wider term which includes different roles adopted by the accountant, in a society. Accountant in a society. I hope you know the different roles, right? You know the different roles which are adopted by an accountant in a society. You can be a tax advisor, you can be a tax consultant, you can be an advisor, you can be a management accountant, you can be a financial accountant, you can be a business consultant, etc. You can have so many roles as an accountant, right? You can have so many roles after qualifying ACCA qualification. So PA is a wider term, right, which includes different role adopted by an accountant in a society. But when we use the word auditor, auditor is a confined terminology, is a confined term, which means the external auditor, which means the external auditor. Even the internal auditor, right? Even the term internal auditor is part of a professional accountant. But when we say auditor, by default, auditor means the external auditor, right? But when we use the word professional accountant, the professional accountant also includes the internal auditor. Is that clear? Is that difference clear between a professional accountant versus an auditor? Everyone? Okay, so which terminology will be used for an auditor? Inquiring mind or professional skepticism in the exam paper? The professional skepticism, right? And which terminology will be used for a professional accountant? Which terminology will be used for a professional accountant? Definitely inquiring mind, right? Now let's find what's the meaning of the term meaning of inquiring mind, which has been used by the code of conduct. So it's very easy to understand the meaning of inquiring mind, but let's see what is the meaning used by the code. No, the code is for the auditor as well as for the professional accountant. This is a code of conduct. If you read the full title, Gokul, the full title of the code of conduct is the code of conduct for professional accountants. So it's not just a code for an auditor, right? It's a code of conduct for professional accountants, everyone who is associated with an accountancy profession, right? So let's find the meaning of the term inquiring mind. Okay, let's go back to my summary. And in the summary, let's see what's the meaning of the word inquiring mind. Let me put that in front of your screen now, and let's start to discuss it. I hope that is clear to all of you. Let's start from here. Number one, reserving the use of the term professional skepticism for the auditor and instead using the term having an inquiring mind for a professional accountant. So I just made that clear to you, right? So we are reserving the term professional skepticism for the auditor and instead we are using the term having a inquiring mind for a professional accountant. So we've done the first bullet. The second bullet, the IESBA has therefore proposed to include the new application material which defines having an inquiring mind. So the IESBA has introduced new application material, and the new application material has been introduced which defines having an inquiring mind. What is an inquiring mind? So have they given a definition of inquiring mind? Can the examiner ask you? Can the examiner ask you to define what is the meaning of the word inquiring mind under the exposure draft? So should you learn this meaning for your exam paper, everyone? Right? Okay, moving on. The first, what is the meaning of the word inquiring mind? Number one, being open and alert for the situation and information that may require further investigation. So being open and alert for the situations. I think that's self-explanatory. All of you can understand that. So being open and alert for situations. That's number one meaning of the word professional skepticism. Let me take that to my Word file. So the meaning of the word inquiring mind in the code, the first meaning of that is being open and alert for situation. I hope that's self-explanatory, right? Number two, the second meaning of the term, considering whether there is a need to critically evaluate the information obtained. Considering whether there is a need to critically evaluate the information obtained. That's very important. So that is also known as inquiring mind. If you critically evaluate the information obtained, is that the exercise of is that an exercise of an inquiring mind, everyone? So if you critically evaluate an information, are you demonstrating an inquiring mind as a professional accountant? And when you are open, are you exercising an inquiring mind? When you are alert, are you exercising an inquiring mind? So I hope you're understanding the definition. It's pretty simple definition to understand. Meaning of an inquiring mind. But what if the examiner asks you the meaning of inquiring mind for 2 marks or 3 marks in the exam paper? You should know it, right? Okay, the last thing. The uh, so on and so forth. It's now the definition is over. The definition just consists of 1 and 2. The last principle, the principle of professional skepticism and inquiring mind are aligned in its application through different terms. Those different terms are used for clarity for auditor and professional accountant. Look at the last line. It says the principle of professional skepticism, which we use for auditor, and the principle of inquiring mind, which we are using for the professional accountant, have been aligned. That's important. In its application, though different terms are used. So is the meaning of the word professional skepticism and the meaning of the term inquiring mind the same? Everyone agrees to that? Is the meaning of the term professional skepticism and the meaning of the term inquiring mind the same? But we are using different terminologies for the auditor and we're using different terminologies for the professional accountant. Is that clear to everyone? So in an exam paper, you will use the terminology professional skepticism for an auditor and an inquiring mind for a professional accountant, even though the meaning of the both the terminologies is the same. So will you remember the definition, everyone? Will you remember the definition of inquiring mind being open and alert for situations and considering whether there is a need to critically evaluate the information? Okay, let's move on to the last element of the article. And then I tell you how would you prepare this article for an examination perspective. Okay, the last change which has been brought by this article, right? The fifth one. Okay, the fifth change on my next page of the summary. I hope you got the summary from my day one and you must have taken a print out of this. Okay, let's see the fifth change. The fifth change which has been brought in is emphasizing. So the fifth change is about emphasizing the importance of being aware of the danger of bias. Importance of being aware of the danger of bias. So as a professional accountant, you should be aware of the danger of bias. That's number one. And number two, having a positive internal culture in firm. So two things have been emphasized. Number one, the proposed amendment is emphasizing two things. Let's take it on the word file for better understanding. The fifth amendment. The proposed amendment, number fifth, is bringing and emphasizing on the importance. Number one, emphasizing is the importance. Let's make it a bullet. Emphasizing the importance of being aware of the danger of bias when carrying out a professional work. And number two, having a positive internal culture in firm. So is everyone clear of the two areas of emphasizing? Importance of being aware of the danger of bias, number one. And number two, having a positive internal culture in the firm. Let's see what they mean. Now, the code of conduct is emphasizing on the importance of being aware of the danger of bias. So the accountant should be aware of the danger of bias. Which danger of bias? Including the technological bias we discussed yesterday. So as an accountant, you should be aware of bias and biasness how biasness influences objectivity and professional behavior. I hope that's pretty simple to understand, right? How the biasness influences your objectivity and professional behavior as an accountant. We even discussed that yesterday. But you should also be aware of something we discussed yesterday, that how technological bias can influence the professional accountant. Did we discuss about technological bias and how technological bias can influence the professional accountant yesterday? Everyone? So can we get impressed by technology? Can we get impressed by the output of technology? Did we discuss that yesterday? If you attended the live webinar. So did we discuss about how technological bias can impress the auditor? How can you just get impressed with technology? Do we get impressed with technology? Is that a normal human psyche that we get impressed by technology and we normally don't find flaw in technology? Is that a normal human psyche, you understand? Even if I talk about as a tutor, I really get impressed with technology and I really start to rely on technology. We never find flaws in technology, but as a professional accountant, you should not just get influenced with technology. You should critically evaluate the outputs of technology. You should critically evaluate the outputs obtained from technology, right? Is that clear to everyone? So as a professional accountant, you should be aware of the danger of bias. Now, in the article, examples of bias have been given. Examples of bias has been given in the article, and you should read that as a student, right? I'm not reading that. Example of bias has been given in the article. Let me show you the page number. I put that in my summary, I think, as well. Uh, List. Please see the list of bias given on page 4 of the article. So that's right here. So you have to read the page 4 of the article. I'm putting it over here as well. Please see the list of bias given on page 4 of the article. So will you read the page 4 of the article? There is a list of bias, examples of bias given, which you should know for your exam paper, including the technological bias, right? So importance of the danger of bias. Please read the list of bias given on page 4 of the article. That's self-explanatory because every example has been explained by the examiner. So importance of being aware of bias. The last thing, having a positive internal culture in firm organizations. Let's see what is a positive internal culture in firms and what does firm means here? Which firms are we talking about? And what is the positive internal culture in a firm? Let's go back to the summary. Let's see what the summary tells us about it. The summary tells us about the first thing. The exposure draft includes examples and a list of bias, particularly the technological bias, with growth of technology and the need for professional accountants to be aware of its danger when carrying out the work, which we discussed yesterday. Please see the list of bias given on page 4 of the article. So that's one. Number two, the IESBA also believed that the internal culture of an employer, whether it is an audit firm of a professional accountant or whether it is another type of an organization where a professional accountant is working, can have a significant impact on whether or not the professional accountant comply with code of conduct or not. So internal culture of an employer, look at this line. This is such an important line. I'm putting it here. Just read it and see if you're comfortable with it. Internal culture of an employer, whether it is an audit firm of a professional accountant or it is another type of an organization. Do we have accountants in other organizations like Unilever, like Procter and Gamble, like Nestle? Do we have accountants in every organization, or do we just have professional accountants in an audit firm? Everywhere, right? So internal culture of an employer, which employer? Not just the audit firms, even the other types of the organization, right? So that's the broad definition of the word employer. So the internal culture of an employer can have a significant impact on whether or not the professional accountant comply with code and act ethically. Do you agree with this? Do you believe the internal culture of an employer can really be important when it comes to compliance with code of conduct? When it comes to complying with a code of conduct, when it comes to complying with ethical standards? So do you believe if an organization have a good culture, if an organization have a good leadership can really make you binding to comply with the code of conduct. So the culture of the employer is very important, right? When it comes to compliance with a code of conduct. Let's see what is the definition of a culture used by the code of conduct. Let's see the definition of culture. You go back to the summary and look at the culture. Internal culture of an employer is most effective when? When is the internal culture of employer effective? So the internal culture of an employer is most effective when leaders and those in managerial roles hold themselves and others accountable for demonstrating ethical values of the organization. Is that important? The leaders of the organizations and the people in the managerial role of the organization hold themselves and others accountable for demonstrating the ethical values in organization, right? Is that an important part of the culture? Hold themselves and others accountable. So will that really ensure an environment of compliance? Environment of compliance. Number two, appropriate education and training. Should there be proper education and training so that you make people aware of the code of conduct and the compliance with the code of conduct? So should there be an appropriate training programs and education programs within the organization to ensure compliance with code of conduct? And lastly, ethical values are adhered in dealing with third parties. You should ensure that when you are dealing with third parties like customers and suppliers and banks, you also demonstrate your ethical values. So three things are important, right? A, B, C. I'm just taking the A, B, C on my Word file because they're part of the internal culture, which you should know for an exam paper. So what are three things as part of the internal culture? Number one, leaders and those in the managerial role should hold themselves accountable for demonstrating the ethical values. Number two, there should be appropriate education and training. There should be appropriate education and training in the organization. And number C, you should follow the ethical principles when you are dealing with the third parties. So will you remember the definition of an internal culture, everyone? So hold themselves and other accountable. Number one, appropriate education and training. Number two, and adhering in with ethics when dealing with third parties. Is that clear? So will you remember the 5 changes which has been brought into the code, whether they are new things or whether they are reinforcements? Now, how would you go about preparing this article from an examination point of view? That's a big question. How to prepare this article for exam purpose? I think that's a big question which I should solve and exit from this article. Now, if you're preparing this article for an examination point of view, first of all, what you should do. Firstly, I would prefer that go through, you just go through the article published before you read my summary. You just go through the article published and try to understand it yourself. Now, you also have my webinar where I've covered the article. So that will really help you. But first, go through the article published, try to understand it yourself. Secondly, read my summary. Read my summary of changes, the 5 key changes which has been brought in the article. Read my summary of changes, 5 key changes, and remember them for examination point, and remember them for your exams, right? So read through my summary, the 5 changes, remember them for your exams. Ensure all definitions covered all definitions covered within the exposure draft are all definitions covered within exposure drafts are all definitions covered within exposure drafts are on your fingertips. That's very important. So all definitions will be very, very important because I mentioned that yesterday. Whenever a new article is published, examiner test it for knowledge. So examiner can ask you the definition. So ensure all definitions covered within exposure drafts are on your fingertips. Now, some of the key definitions. I think we got a definition of objectivity yesterday, and we got a definition of integrity yesterday, if I'm not wrong. We got a definition of inquiring mind today, and we got a definition of some sort of a definition of internal culture of a firm. I think these are key terminologies: objectivity, integrity, inquiring mind, and internal culture of a firm. And even we got through a definition, if I'm not missing it. Just let me confirm that from my previous day. Okay, we got the definition of integrity yesterday. We got a definition of fine. So that's the two definitions, right? So definitions of objectivity, definitions of integrity, inquiring mind, and internal culture of firm. So you should ensure that you covered all the definitions, and you should just read through my summary and have the changes on your mind. Now, ensure whenever a new whenever a new exposure draft is tested, the examiner test it for knowledge. So examiner can ask you a lot of knowledge from this article. Yes, even you can know the definition of a professional accountant. What is the definition of a professional accountant? Even you can know the definition of a BICE, page number 4. Definition of BICE covered on page 4 of the article. Page 4 of the article, including the technological BICE. Technological BICE. So we are not sure, but as per the practices of the examiner, you can expect something like 10 marks from this article, whereby the examiner asks you something about objectivity or something about integrity. You know ethical and professional issues is a very important syllabus area, and you know examiner likes ethical and professional issues a lot. He might ask this in question number 1, 2, or 3. So is that clear to everyone? Will the day 1 and day